This battle seems fantastic, but it really happened. Get ready to learn the truth that will turn your knowledge of history upside down. For 6 years, the shadow of the greatest defeat in Roman history hung over the empire. 3 legions, 3 eagles, 20,000 men. All were swallowed up by the dark forests of Germany. The empire thirsted for revenge, and that revenge was to be brought by the young and ambitious commander Germanicus, nephew of Emperor Tiberius himself. His campaign was not just a military operation, it was a ritual of vengeance, a crusade for the dishonored honor of Rome, and a last desperate attempt to prove that there was no force on earth capable of challenging the power of the eternal city with impunity. The soldiers were not marching to conquer, but to punish, driven not only by duty, but also by the ghosts of their fallen comrades. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how a handful of desperate legionnaires, trapped in the swamps of Germany, managed not only to survive surrounded by an army of 40,000 Germans, but also to strike a blow that forever changed the relationship between Rome and its most formidable enemy. What if I told you that absolutely everything you romantically believed about the famous Roman honor and valor from books is either an incomplete truth or a beautiful myth? For a wealthy senator in marble Rome, the concept of honor was closely and inextricably linked to political intrigue, career advancement, and the accumulation of personal wealth through corruption. But for a simple legionnaire on the distant, cold frontier of the empire, it was something much more real, tangible, and sacred. His unit, in the unbreakable iron battle formation of his comrades, and in the firm conviction that no comrade who fell in battle would remain unavenged by his enemies. These simple things defined the soldier's identity and self-respect, giving meaning to his dangerous service on the edge of civilization. It was this deep sense of insulted honor and duty to the fallen, and not the cold orders from distant Rome from politicians, that drove the huge army of the charismatic Germanicus inexorably deep into the hostile Germanic lands beyond the Rhine. 6 long years had passed since that terrible, bloody autumn of 9 AD, when Quintilius Varus's 3 elite legions disappeared without a trace, completely destroyed by the Germans in the ominous Teutoburg Forest. For mighty Rome, this national defeat was a deep, unhealed wound on the body of the empire, a constant painful reminder of its humiliation and powerlessness before the barbarians. The loss of the 3 eagles of the legions was a great disgrace, whispered about throughout the empire, undermining Rome's prestige. The large-scale military campaign of 15 AD was not just another act of cold revenge against enemies or an attempt to regain territory. It was a desperate attempt by the emperor and the army to heal the collective national trauma of the entire Roman people and restore their shaken faith in the invincibility of the legions. The soldiers marched with trepidation into the cursed lands beyond the Rhine, which were superstitiously believed to be cursed by the gods, into the dark, dense forests which, according to ominous rumors and legends, had swallowed their predecessors without a trace 6 years earlier. Every step into the depths of Germania was a step into the unknown, full of dangers and ghosts of the past haunting the living. For the youngest Germanicus, nephew of Emperor Tiberius, it was also a deeply personal matter of honor and ambition. He was not just an appointed mercenary general. He was a direct representative of the imperial Julio-Claudian dynasty, and on his young shoulders rested the enormous responsibility of restoring the undermined military reputation of all Rome before the world. His personal political ambitions for the future and his thirst for military glory for his career were inextricably and organically linked to the success of this dangerous mission of revenge. Victory would make him a hero and a possible heir to the throne, while defeat would ruin his career and possibly his life. The hardened legionaries who formed the backbone of his large army of 8 legions were experienced veterans of many campaigns, many of whom knew personally the soldiers who had tragically died with Varus in the ambush 6 years earlier. They were not going on this campaign simply to fight another barbarian enemy for booty. They marched with grim determination to bring justice to the Germans and to give a proper burial to the scattered remains of their brothers in arms left to rot in the forest. It was a sacred duty to the fallen that could not be ignored without staining their honor forever. The atmosphere in the huge army was gloomy, tense, and deadly determined, without the usual merriment. There were no familiar, boastful speeches from the centurions about an easy victory over the barbarians and rich spoils, as there had been 6 fateful years earlier before the disaster. Every experienced centurion, every ordinary legionnaire understood deep in their hearts that this dangerous campaign would be a severe test of strength, not only of their steel weapons and armor, but also of their unyielding spirit and will to win. The faint of heart would not return alive from this campaign into the heart of enemy territory, where every bush could hide an ambush. They were mentally preparing themselves not for a single open battle on the plain, but for an exhausting war of attrition with the hostile forest itself and its inhabitants, with treacherous swamps that sucked people in, with the vengeful spirits of fallen comrades demanding retribution. In their superstitious eyes, wild Germany was not just another enemy territory to be conquered and plundered. It was a cursed place of crime against Rome, which urgently required ritual purification by the punishing fire and merciless sword of the legionaries. Only the blood of their enemies could wash away the shame of defeat and appease the restless souls of the fallen, crying out for vengeance from their grave. This large-scale campaign of retribution was the emotional culmination of 6 years of collective grief and accumulated anger of the entire army. All the concentrated military power of 8 full legions, tens of thousands of soldiers stationed on the fortified Rhine, was purposefully directed toward a single goal: to find and severely punish the elusive Arminius, the leader of the Cherusci tribe, who was the chief architect and organizer of that long-ago national catastrophe in the forest. Arminius became a symbol of German treachery and betrayal, and Rome needed his head to restore its honor above all else. The typical Roman legionary was a cynical pragmatist and materialist by nature, but even he was not completely immune to deep human emotions and attachments. The thirst for bloody revenge for their fallen comrades was a powerful fuel and motivation that relentlessly drove this well-oiled military machine of legions forward through any obstacles. And this all-consuming thirst for retribution was so strong and primal that it made even cowardly soldiers completely forget their natural fear of death and go into the thick of battle. Revenge was stronger than the instinct for self-preservation. Do you think that the thirst for revenge and retribution can be a morally justified and legitimate driving force for an entire army of tens of thousands of people? Share your informed opinion in the comments below. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Roman invasion of Germany. Germanicus's plan was based not on brute force, but on a strategy that took into account all the mistakes of his predecessor. He did not intend to march in a single column deep into enemy territory. He devised an operation of unprecedented scale. His army, numbering about 80,000 men, was divided into 3 independent groups. One group, under the command of Aulus Caecina Severus, was to advance through central Germany. Another, under Germanicus's personal command, advanced northward, using the fleet to transport troops across rivers. The third group operated from the south, distracting part of the Germanic tribes. It was a classic Roman strategy of divide and rule, applied on a staggering scale. Germanicus did not want to simply defeat the Germans. He wanted to trap them in a pincer movement. The Roman army was at the peak of its power. The legionaries were armed with short swords called gladiuses, heavy throwing spears called pilums, and protected by large rectangular shields called scutums. Their discipline and ability to act as a single mechanism were their main weapons. But the Romans' enemy was not only the Germanic army. Their main enemy was the land itself. Endless dark forests where sunlight was lost, and treacherous swamps capable of swallowing entire cohorts. Germanicus understood this. His legions moved slowly and methodically. Every evening, they set up a fortified camp, protected by a moat and a palisade, turning it into an impregnable fortress. The Romans built roads and bridges and cut paths through the forests. They did not simply march through Germany. They tried to impose their Roman order on this wild land. It was a war of engineering against primitive chaos. A fleet of 1,000 ships played a key role. It allowed troops and supplies to be quickly transported along the Ems, Weser, and Elbe rivers, penetrating deep into enemy territory. This deprived the Germans of their main advantage, knowledge of the terrain. Initially, the campaign was successful. The Romans crushed scattered Germanic troops, advancing further and further from the Rhine. It seemed that revenge was near and inevitable. But could all the might of the Roman military machine prepare them for what they would find in the heart of this cursed forest? In the next chapter, you will learn about a gruesome discovery that shocked even battle-hardened veterans. What they found in the old archives was nothing compared to what the Romans saw with their own eyes. Deep in the Teutoburg Forest, the advance guard stumbled upon a place where time had stood still 6 years ago. It was the field of Varus's legion's last battle. The soldiers stopped in silence. Before them lay a grim picture. The half-rotten remains of fortifications erected in a desperate attempt to defend themselves. Everywhere among the trees and in the dry riverbeds, the bones of thousands of people lay bleaching in the sun. The ground was littered with broken weapons, rusted helmets, and fragments of armor. These were the silent witnesses to the agony of 3 legions. Every step on this ground was a step on a grave. The sacred groves of the Germans made a particularly strong impression on the soldiers. Skulls hung from the trees, and roughly hewn altars stood at their feet. It was here, according to the survivors, that the Germans sacrificed captured centurions and tribunes to their gods. Germanicus ordered all the remains to be collected. The legionaries, hardened by dozens of battles, carried out this mournful task with grim determination. They carefully gathered the bones of their comrades, separating them from the bones of horses and mules. It was not just an order, it was a sacred duty. Leaving a Roman soldier unburied was considered the greatest disgrace. Now, 6 years later, justice had finally prevailed. A huge mound was built from the collected remains. Soldiers brought earth in their helmets, creating the first monument on this land to the fallen Roman soldiers. It was an act not only of mourning, but also of defiance, a sign that Rome had returned. Germanicus personally took part in the funeral ceremony. He delivered a speech full of grief and anger, swearing on this mound that revenge would be exacted. His words ignited a cold fury in the hearts of the soldiers. This scene became a turning point in the entire campaign. Now the war was no longer just a military operation. It had become a sacred duty to the fallen. The battlefield was cleared, the bones were laid to rest. But the ghosts of the Teutoburg Forest did not leave the Roman army. They silently followed it, demanding revenge. Are you ready to learn the truth about how one man outmaneuvered 8 Roman legions? While the Romans were busy with the burial, their main enemy, Arminius, wasted no time. He watched Germanicus's actions, waiting for the right moment to strike. Arminius was a genius of guerrilla warfare. He understood perfectly well that his tribal militia could not withstand the Iron Legions in open battle. His strength lay in his knowledge of the terrain, his cunning, and his element of surprise. He did not attack the main Roman forces. Instead, he began to harass their flanks and supply lines with small but exhausting raids. His warriors would emerge from the forest, strike, and disappear into the thicket before the Romans could organize their defenses. As the Roman army advanced deeper into Germany, its lines of communication stretched. Arminius waited patiently for Germanicus to make a mistake. And soon that moment came. Having completed his main combat tasks, Germanicus began to withdraw his troops to their winter quarters on the Rhine. He divided his huge army to facilitate supply. This was exactly what Arminius had been waiting for. His main target was the column commanded by the experienced general Aulus Caecina. 4 legions, about 20,000 men, were returning along the old Roman road known as the Long Bridges. This road was a long causeway laid across a marshy lowland. Arminius knew this place like the back of his hand. He allowed Caecina's column to penetrate deep into the marshes. Then his warriors felled trees on the wooded slopes, blocking the road and cutting off the Romans' retreat. At the same time, other Germanic troops destroyed the causeway ahead of the Roman column. 4 legions found themselves trapped in a narrow, marshy valley. The stage was set for a repeat of the tragedy of 6 years earlier. The Romans fell into the same trap as Varus's legions. From all sides, from the wooded hills, tens of thousands of Germanic warriors watched them. A ringing silence hung in the air before the storm. How were the Romans going to get out of the trap, surrounded by swamps and enemies? In the next chapter, you will find yourself in the midst of a desperate battle for survival. The battle began suddenly, without warning or challenge. From the densely wooded hills surrounding the marshy valley on all sides, a thick shower of spears and arrows flew out of the darkness and rained down on the stretched-out Roman column. The Germanic warriors did not show themselves openly, cautiously firing methodically from behind thick tree trunks, using the forest as natural cover and to their advantage. It was a classic ambush, carefully planned and flawlessly executed. The Romans had fallen into a deadly trap from which there was no easy escape. From behind thick tree trunks, using the forest as natural cover and to their advantage. It was a classic ambush, carefully planned and flawlessly executed. The Romans had fallen into a deadly trap from which there was no easy escape. The legions of the experienced Caecina found themselves in a truly terrible, hopeless situation, which they feared most of all. The narrow wooden causeway, several meters wide, categorically prevented them from turning into their usual effective battle formation and using their tactical advantages. They were helplessly stretched out for several kilometers like a snake, presenting an ideal, unprotected target for enemy projectiles from all sides. Roman discipline and training were useless when it was impossible to form a defensive formation. This was exactly what the cunning Arminius hoped to exploit. The main critical task for survival was to restore the log road destroyed by the Germans at any cost, so that the column could break through to safety. Hardened centurions mercilessly drove their legionaries into the sticky, sucking quagmire of the swamp to build a new causeway from improvised materials under the enemy's incessant, deadly fire. It was a desperate and almost physically impossible task under constant fire, building a bridge in a hail of arrows, losing men every minute. The exhausted soldiers, weighed down by heavy metal armor and equipment, were hopelessly stuck waist-deep in cold mud and slime. They desperately tried to fell huge trees with axes and carry heavy stones for the foundation, while their comrades in arms, standing on the shaky remains of the old road, desperately tried to shield the builders with their shields from the hail of arrows and spears. The losses among the workers were enormous and grew with every passing hour. The swamp was stained with the blood of the fallen, but the work did not stop, as stopping meant death for all. The relentless Arminius, commanding from cover, gave the exhausted Romans not a moment's rest or respite to regroup. As soon as the Romans attempted to organize any kind of defense in one vulnerable spot of the column, the Germans immediately attacked fiercely in a completely different spot, left unprotected. It was organized, controlled chaos of war, masterfully managed by the iron will of the experienced Germanic leader Arminius, who knew Roman tactics. He played with the legions like a cat with mice, wearing them down morally and physically. By the middle of the bloody day, the situation for the Romans had become critical, almost hopeless. Part of the hastily constructed causeway collapsed under the weight, dragging heavy carts with the wounded and precious equipment and provisions into the greedy swamp. Panic and fear began to spread dangerously among the dense ranks of legionnaires who saw the death of their comrades, threatening a complete breakdown of discipline. The veterans saw that they were repeating the path of Varus' legions, and this vision paralyzed the will to resist in many. At one critical moment, the fierce Germans broke through the weakened defenses to the very center of the stretched column, where the standards were located. They nearly captured the sacred golden eagle of the 21st Legion, one of Rome's main military shrines, the loss of which would have been an indelible disgrace. Only a desperate, suicidal counterattack by the elite Praetorian cohort of bodyguards, who did not spare their lives, saved the critical situation and recaptured the eagle from the barbarians. But the price was high. The best warriors fell defending the symbol of honor. By evening, the first grueling day of battle finally ended with the setting of the sun. The exhausted Romans suffered heavy, catastrophic losses in manpower, but were still unable to break through the ambush and advance to safety. They were physically exhausted from hours of fighting, demoralized by the sight of their fallen comrades, and hopelessly trapped in the heart of hostile enemy territory without help. They were completely surrounded, and the prospects of survival seemed slim for most of the soldiers who saw death before their eyes. The cold night brought only a brief, deceptive respite for rest and dressing wounds. In the pitch darkness, the ominous sounds of the Germans celebrating their victory rang out from all sides of the invisible forest. For many desperate legionnaires, this night seemed to be the last of their lives, and they said goodbye to their comrades, not expecting to live to see dawn. Some wrote farewell letters to their families that would never be delivered. They were surrounded on all sides by a superior enemy, completely cut off from any outside help, and their fighting spirit was broken by defeat. It seemed inevitable that the tragic fate of Varra's legions was about to be repeated here, but their old battle-hardened general Caecina, who had not lost his cool, had a completely different, daring plan of rescue, which he told no one about. This is what happens behind closed doors when generals lose hope. At night, a military council gathered in Aulus Caecina's tent. The mood was pessimistic. Many senior officers suggested abandoning the baggage train and the wounded and trying to break through in small groups. Caecina, who was almost 60 years old, listened to everyone. He had spent 40 years of his life in the legions and had seen worse situations. He was the embodiment of old Roman fortitude and unyielding will. In a sharp, confident voice, he rejected all the panicky suggestions. He reminded the officers of their duty, of the honor of the legions, and that Rome never abandons its own. His words had a sobering effect. Caecina's plan was bold and risky. He proposed to stop trying to break through and take up defensive positions right there in the swamp. He decided to impose his type of battle on the Germans. His order was simple: build a fully fortified camp on a small, dry patch of land overnight. It seemed like madness. Building a fortress under constant fire, knee-deep in mud, was a task that pushed the limits of human capability. But it was their only chance. The camp would give them protection, allow them to catch their breath and organize their defense. It was the only way to turn Arminius's trap into a battlefield where the Romans had a chance. Caecina personally visited the posts, talking to the centurions and soldiers. He did not promise an easy victory, but his calm confidence was contagious to the legionaries. They saw before them not a confused politician like Varus, but a real soldier. The old general understood the enemy's psychology. He knew that the Germans, intoxicated by success, would lose their caution. He decided to play on their greed and impatience. His plan was not just a defense, it was a trap within a trap. He was going to pretend to be a weak, cornered victim in order to provoke the enemy into a decisive, reckless assault. But how could you build a fortress in the middle of a swamp when the enemy was just a few meters away? In the next chapter, we will see the triumph of Roman engineering. As darkness fell, the titanic work began. Caecina divided his 4 legions into 2 parts. 2 legions occupied the defensive perimeter, holding back the constant attacks of the Germans. The other 2 legions became builders. Thousands of soldiers laid down their swords and picked up shovels, pickaxes, and axes. Under cover of night, lit only by a few torches, they began to build a fortress. It was a scene worthy of myth. The Roman legionaries demonstrated what made their army the greatest in the world: incredible discipline and engineering skill. Every soldier knew his maneuver. Every unit worked as a single mechanism. First, they dug a moat around the perimeter of the future camp. They used the earth from the moat to build a rampart. The work proceeded in complete silence, broken only by the clang of tools and the cries of the attacking Germans. The Germans were confused. They expected the Romans to either try to break through or fall into despair, but they could not have imagined that their enemy would start building in the middle of a swamp. By midnight, the rampart was ready. Then the soldiers began to install a palisade of sharpened stakes on it. Each section had been prepared in advance and could be installed in a matter of minutes. Inside the camp, engineers marked out streets and places for tents. Posts were set up for the wounded and warehouses for the surviving equipment. The chaos of the retreat was replaced by strict Roman order. By dawn, the work was complete. Where yesterday there had been only a swamp, now stood a classic Roman camp. It was surrounded by a deep moat and a high rampart with a palisade, ready to withstand. This was not just a camp. It was a challenge to Arminius and his entire army. The Romans were saying to their enemies, "We are here, we are not broken, and we are ready for battle." Now the weary but inspired legionaries could take refuge behind reliable walls. They had gained what they had so desperately needed: time and a sense of security. The roles in this deadly game had changed. The appearance of the Roman camp enraged the Germanic chiefs. Their easy victory was slipping away. A dispute broke out in the Germanic War Council. Arminius, true to his tactics, proposed continuing the siege. He argued that the Romans were running out of supplies and that in a few days, hunger would force them to surrender without a fight. He called for patience, but other leaders, led by Arminius' uncle Ingvioma, craved glory and plunder. They accused Arminius of cowardice. They shouted that the Romans were trapped and that a single powerful blow would finish them off and capture their riches. Greed and pride prevailed over common sense. Most of the warriors supported the idea of an immediate assault. Arminius was forced to give in. At dawn, 40,000 Germanic warriors rushed into battle with a deafening roar. They carried homemade ladders and bundles of brushwood to throw over the moat. It was a wave of fury designed to sweep away the Roman fortress. The first blow fell on the main gate. The Germans tried to break it down with battering rams and set it on fire, but they were met with heavy fire from Roman archers and catapults mounted on the walls. Other troops tried to cross the moat and climb the rampart. They scrambled over the bodies of their fallen comrades, desperately trying to grab hold of the palisade, which was slippery with mud. It was pure madness. The Romans, on the other hand, acted calmly and in an organized manner. They stood on the rampart in dense rows, covered by their shields. At the command of the centurions, they methodically threw their pylons, piercing the Germanic shields and armor. Caecina watched the battle from the main tower. He saw that the Germans, despite their bravery, were acting chaotically. They had no unified plan. Each unit attacked on its own. By midday, the assault began to peter out. The moat in front of the camp was littered with bodies, but the Roman fortifications remained intact. The Germans suffered heavy losses, but failed to achieve any significant success. At this point, Caecina put the second part of his plan into action. He noticed that the Germans were attacking the rear, less protected gate of the camp most fiercely. That was where he decided to set his trap. He ordered the legionaries defending this section to feign weakness and begin a slow retreat. Seeing this, the German spirits rose. They decided that this was the decisive moment of the battle. With redoubled force, they attacked this sector. Thousands of warriors broke through the first line of defense and poured into the camp. They lost all order, anticipating imminent victory and rich spoils. But they did not know that at that moment, on Caecina's orders, selected cohorts, about 5,000 of the best legionaries, were silently preparing for a counterattack at the side gates. They were just waiting for the signal. And then it sounded. When the bulk of the Germans had drawn deep into the camp, the main and side gates burst open with a deafening roar of trumpets. Fresh and formed into perfect battle order, the Roman cohorts struck the flank and rear of their stunned enemy. The effect was devastating. The Germans, who did not expect such a blow, found themselves trapped between the attacking cohorts and the rampart, to which its defenders had already returned. Their attack instantly turned into a massacre. The disciplined Roman infantry, covered by a wall of shields, advanced step by step, methodically wielding their short swords. The Germans, deprived of room for maneuver, could not use their long weapons. Their numerical superiority turned against them. Panic broke out in the German ranks. Those at the front tried to retreat, but bumped into those who were still trying to break into the camp. The attack faltered and turned into a disorderly retreat. Arminius, who was fighting in the front lines, tried to restore order, but no one listened to him anymore. He had to fight his way out of the encirclement to save his life. The battle was lost. The Romans pursued their fleeing enemies to the forest, completing their route. The field in front of the camp was littered with weapons and the bodies of Germanic warriors. It was a complete and unconditional victory, achieved through tactics and discipline over fury and numbers. On the cold morning after the battle, Caecina's exhausted legions left their fortified camp on the marsh in an orderly fashion. In complete, gloomy silence, in perfect formation, with the legion's banners proudly unfurled and eagles at the front, they marched solemnly across the blood-stained field of their hard-won victory over the Germans the day before. It was a symbolic triumph of the survivors over death, a demonstration of Rome's unyielding strength, even in the most desperate circumstances. Every step across the field strewn with the bodies of their enemies was an affirmation of the superiority of Roman discipline and training over barbarian fury and number. The rest of the long journey back to the safety of the Rhine through hostile territory passed relatively calmly, without serious incidents or attacks. Demoralized by their crushing defeat, the Germans did not dare to openly attack the united legions again, fearing a repeat of their defeat. News of the crushing, bloody defeat of the Germanic tribes at the Long Bridges spread like wildfire throughout the vast territory of Germania, sowing fear and despondency. The myth of an easy victory over the Romans, as at Varus, was dispelled, and the barbarians realized that the legions had returned stronger and more vicious than ever. Soon, the remaining scattered parts of the Roman army from other campaigns also returned safely to their bases. The charismatic Germanicus himself personally led a successful punitive campaign in the north against other tribes, and even managed to triumphantly recapture one of the 3 sacred eagles of the legions lost by Varus 6 years earlier, which was a huge moral victory. Formally, by all accounts, the military campaign of 15 AD was recognized as a brilliant strategic success for Rome. The goals of the campaign were achieved, the enemy was punished, the eagle returned, which raised the morale of the entire empire and army. Rome took cruel revenge for the shame of Teutoburg with the blood of thousands of Germans. The insulted honor of the legions was solemnly restored on the battlefield. The scattered remains of the fallen Romans were buried with honors in mass graves, and their killers were severely punished with sword and fire. Germanicus returned triumphantly to a jubilant Rome as a true national hero and savior of honor, and a grand triumph was held for him with a procession of prisoners through the entire city. Crowds of Romans hailed him as the new Scipio, conqueror of the barbarians and avenger of the fallen. The cautious Emperor Tiberius, a wise and calculating ruler with many years of military experience, saw things fundamentally differently from the jubilant crowd. He soberly saw the enormous bloody price that this ostentatious victory had cost the empire. thousands of dead and huge expenses for the treasury. He understood deeply from experience that the complete military conquest of all of wild Germany up to the Elbe would require astronomical material resources for decades and would inevitably lead to an exhausting, endless guerrilla war in the forests with no prospect of victory. The price of conquering Germany was unacceptably high for rational policy, and the benefits did not justify the costs. The pragmatic Tiberius decisively recalled the popular Germanicus from Germany, despite protests, and sent him east for a campaign in Armenia, far from the legions. The active aggressive policy of conquering lands beyond the Rhine was officially ended by imperial decree forever. For many centuries to come, the wide Rhine River became the official, fortified border of the Roman Empire with the barbarian world, a line that was not crossed. Rome gave up its dream of conquering Germany, recognizing the reality that these lands were not worth the blood of its legionaries. Caecina's heroic victory at the Long Bridges became a classic, textbook example of the superiority of Roman military art over barbarism. It was included in all military textbooks and manuals, and was carefully studied by many generations of future commanders throughout the empire. It was an invaluable practical lesson in military history on how iron discipline, engineering ingenuity, and correct tactics can defeat a numerically superior aggressive enemy on its own territory. The battle proved that organization is more important than numbers, and training is more important than fury and bravery. For the Germanic tribes, this heavy defeat had complex dual consequences in the long term. On the one hand, it clearly showed them that they were physically incapable of defeating organized Rome in open field combat between legions. On the other, paradoxical hand, it forced pragmatic Rome to finally abandon its plans to conquer and subjugate them, which effectively secured the Germans' independence and freedom for centuries. The defeat turned into a strategic victory. Germany remained free because Rome decided that its conquest was unprofitable and too expensive. The legendary Arminius remained a national hero and liberator of Germany in the memory of the people for centuries, but his personal political authority among the leaders was seriously undermined by his failures. Internal bloody strife between Germanic tribes for power and resources flared up with new destructive force after the departure of the Romans, and a few years after the victory, he was treacherously killed by conspirators from among his own compatriots who feared his growing dictatorial power and ambitions. The hero fell at the hands of those he had liberated, which was a tragic irony of fate. Thus ended the bloody story of Rome's revenge on the barbarians for Teutoburg. It became one of the most dramatic and pivotal pages in the long history of confrontation between civilized Rome and the barbaric Germanic world on the border. And it convincingly proved the paradoxical truth that sometimes victory in a decisive battle strategically means wisely refusing to continue a senseless war and accepting new borders. Having won, Rome acknowledged the defeat of its ambitions. We can see that the Battle of the Long Bridges was not just a battle. It was the culmination of a 6-year drama, a story of revenge, despair, courage, and ingenious tactics. Two worlds collided in this battle, the Iron Order of Rome and the indomitable spirit of the Germanic forests. Caecina's legions survived and won not because they were stronger, but because even in the most hopeless situation, they remained true to themselves, to their discipline, their engineering skills, and their unyielding commander. It was a triumph not so much of weapons as of spirit. History is full of similar battles, where tactics and courage prevailed over numbers. What other great battles of the past would you like to see on our channel? Suggest your topics in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.